What is up, guys? Today's video is one that I've been super excited to make for the past couple of months because, as a lot of you probably already know, I'm really into maximizing productivity in my own life. So I decided I would make a video talking about 5 of the simple things that I do that help me get more done in the day. So hopefully you can incorporate some of those into your own lives, just get a little bit more or a lot more productive. Let's get into it. Alright, so the first thing I want to talk about is actually a combination of the Pareto principle and Parkinson's law. Now, these are actually two completely separate ideas, but it wasn't until recently that I started thinking about how you can leverage them in tandem, basically combining the Pareto principle and Parkinson's law to build your own framework that keeps you from wasting a lot of time. As a brief summary for anyone who's not familiar with either the Pareto principle or Parkinson's law, the Pareto principle, also known as the 80-20 rule, basically states that 20% of inputs yields 80% of outputs, and that 80% of inputs results in that last 20% of outputs. And the one-sentence version of Parkinson's law is that work expands to fill the time allocated to it. Okay, so that's great. We got some definitions. But what does this actually mean for you? The Pareto principle on its own, when leveraged correctly, is already a super valuable tool. In cases where you don't really need to be perfect, maybe you just need to be good enough. For example, for me, it's, am I being healthy enough? Am I being fit enough? I don't need to go to the Olympics or be the healthiest person in the world. And as a result, what are the most important key things that I can be doing to make sure that I stay relatively healthy and fit without going above and beyond and dedicating my whole life to either of those things? When you really think about it, this actually pertains to a lot of different areas. The ratio is obviously not always 80-20, but that core principle still stands, which is what are the most important things that I can be doing with my time or my resources that are going to give me the most important outcomes. Now, where Parkinson's law fits into all of this is if you give yourself too much time to do something, then the thing you're doing is probably going to take up all of that time. For example, let's say I want to leverage the Pareto principle for a personal project that I'm doing. I'm not going to post or publish this anywhere. I just really need to get to a good enough state for my own purposes and for my own learning. So I want to focus on that main 20% of inputs that's going to get me that 80% outcome. And let's say I decide I'm going to give myself a month to get this done. The problem is, by giving myself a month to get it done, I'm probably going to take the whole month to do it, which means if I've already put in that 20% of inputs that's the most important halfway through the month and gotten my 80% of outcomes, I'm probably going to start dragging my feet and doing other things that aren't nearly as important for the second half of the month, because I've given myself that time. By leveraging Parkinson's law alongside the Pareto principle, we can recognize that instead of giving ourselves a month in this instance, we give ourselves 2 weeks, we focus on that main 80% outcome, and then we just leave the project there because in this case, we don't really care what happens to it. Now, obviously, it pretty much goes without saying that this does not pertain to every situation. You don't want to buy 80% of a car or have an app that only works 80% of the time, but starting to look for the situations where you can focus on getting those big wins, that 80% of outcomes, by only putting in basically the minimal effort or the most important inputs, it can completely transform the way that you prioritize things, and you can focus on doing what is most important. Growing up, the biggest issue I had with building a routine and habits was that I tried to make everything time-based. At 6 a.m., I would be doing thing A, then 6:30, I'd do thing B, and then at 7 o'clock, I'd switch over to thing C. And this never really worked. I would spend a couple of weeks trying to stick to the schedule, it became unrealistic with the hyper-planning, and it would all just fall apart, and I would be right back where I started. And it wasn't really until about a year ago that I learned about something known as habit stacks, and I made a video at the time talking about it, and since then, I have built on top of it, and it has become the single most important productivity thing that I do. And as you might have guessed from the name, these habits are not time-based, they're stack-based, or basically building a chain where one habit kicks off another one, which kicks off another one, and so on down the stack. By switching over to habit stacks, I was finally able to build a routine that I could actually stick to because it was flexible enough that it wasn't constantly breaking whenever I missed a time on my schedule. So, assuming that you haven't already watched my other video where I talked about how you make a habit stack from scratch, how do you get started with this? You want to start with a habit that you already do consistently, like brushing your teeth, and then attach something to it. After I brush my teeth, I'll write in my journal. Now, especially in the beginning, you want to use cues to reinforce the behavior. So for this example, we might want to add a visual cue so that we leave the journal out by the sink so that we always see it and we don't forget to do the journaling. And then from there, it's just a matter of building more things onto the stack. After I brush my teeth, I journal. After I journal, I meditate. After I meditate, I go on a run, etc. But if you're not careful and you get too carried away with this, the whole thing can fall apart. The two most important things you need to think about when you're building up these habit stacks is consistency and compatibility. Now, when it comes to consistency, you want to make sure that that base habit is something that you do regularly. That's why I use the example of brushing my teeth. That's something that I do every day, twice a day. But for example, if I built it on top of something that I do most days, but sometimes I miss, that means that the thing I build on top of it will become something I do most days, but I sometimes miss. And the second thing you have to worry about is compatibility, which is basically just another way of saying, is this habit gonna work well next to this one? An example I'm pretty sure I've used before is going on a run directly after eating dinner. Personally, I hate running on a full stomach, and this would just not work well for me. But you can flip this around, and I actually did something similar to this, which is I'm not going to eat dinner until I've completed my run. So if you're willing to take the time to tweak and tune your routines as things start to fall apart and add new things into your routine, then at least in my experience, this is miles better than any other form of time-based habits that I've tried. And I can definitely say that this has improved my productivity several times over in terms of guaranteeing that I actually get all the stuff done that I want to do in a day. So, in my opinion, the term multitasking gets thrown around a little bit too loosely. A lot of people use it when they really mean context switching just in rapid succession, and that's why I'm gonna call this one true multitasking. At its core, this is actually a pretty simple idea. All we have to do is fuse together two things that we do, one of which normally on autopilot without really any mental exertion, like jogging on the treadmill or cooking dinner, with something that requires solely mental exertion and not any physical effort, such as listening to an audiobook. I think I mentioned this briefly in another video I released earlier this year, but this is how I'm able to read a book every single week without ever dedicating any time specifically to reading. Anytime that I'm either cooking dinner or cleaning or washing the dishes or any other task like that, I always have my AirPods in and I'm always listening to a book. And the reason why this is really true multitasking is I'm not going any slower at washing the dishes or cooking dinner because I'm listening to a book, because I can really just do that on autopilot, but I'm also able to really focus on the book and I'm not missing out on what the author is saying because I'm not really distracted by anything else. Take a look at your schedule and look for those pockets of time when you aren't normally doing anything that's exercising your mind. And that could just be walking around the campus if you're in college, doing the dishes, doing the laundry. And if you're not into reading audiobooks, there's lots of other things that you could do to exercise your mind. But if you're able to do this, working your mind at the same time as your body or your hands or whatever else you're doing, then you will really, truly be multitasking. This is probably the simplest point in the whole video, but if you take this seriously, it will make a big difference, I promise you. And basically it boils down to, if you want to do more of something, make it easier, and if you want to do less of something, make it harder. So the reason why this works is because humans are inherently lazy, or more so, we like to take the path of least resistance. So when the things that are less healthy for us are really convenient and easy, we're more inclined to do them, and when the things that are healthier are harder, we're less inclined to do them. But we can turn this whole thing on its head if we change our behaviors and our environment design. So we can make the things that are normally really convenient and bad for us harder to do and really inconvenient, and then take the things that are really healthy but generally we have to go out of our way to do and make them as simple as possible. As an example, let's say you're trying to be productive but you just keep checking your phone throughout the day. Put it in another room so that every time you want to look at it, it's a very deliberate act of you have to get up and walk over to it and then walk back to your seat. Or let's say that you want to start working out in the mornings. Put your workout clothes and your shoes next to the bed the night before so that it's right there when you wake up and you have one less excuse for not doing your workout. If you're willing to be creative about it, there are a ton of different ways that you can make your behaviors easier or harder, but on their own, all these things are generally pretty small and aren't going to make a huge difference. It's only once you start making a lot of these changes and they start to compound that you're gonna notice real changes to your behaviors, and that's gonna make you a lot more productive, and also typically is gonna result in a healthier lifestyle. All right, so the final point I want to talk about is this idea of having different contexts for different kinds of actions. As someone who works from home full time, it's important for me able to switch from work mode to life mode and then vice versa on a regular basis, and that's where building context comes in. Now, in an ideal world, you would have a big enough apartment or house that you could have completely different contexts for different things. You could physically be in one room in one space when you're doing one thing, and then you'd go to a different room when you're doing something else. However, most people are probably living in either college dorms or small apartments, and this isn't really an option. And that's the situation I've been in for about the past year. I have a desk that I work at all throughout the day, all week long for my job, but then in the mornings and in the evenings, I still use the desk either for video editing or doing my own development just for fun. And as a result, I don't get a physical location switch. But even if you can't have different locations dedicated to different activities in your house or your apartment, you can still build different contexts in a number of other ways. For me, some of these things are wearing my headphones and listening to specific music that I only use when I'm trying to focus, or putting my desk in the standing position, and more recently putting my phone into black and white mode during work hours, so I'm less inclined to use it. Obviously, this is a bit of an individual thing. Those are all things that work well for me, but they might not work well for you. But there are certain things, for example, that you should just never do. For example, you shouldn't do work in bed because it's gonna make it harder to actually get work done and to focus. But it's also then gonna be harder to sleep at the end of the day because you've now gotten used to doing work while you're in bed. I'm still looking for different ways that I can build up this context between work and life to improve that separation. And that really sums up everything I've talked about in this video, which is that I'm always actively trying to become more productive and just learn more about this kind of stuff just to make myself better, but then also so I can share it with all of you guys. So if you want to learn more about this kind of stuff or just anything else I talk about on this channel, make sure you subscribe if you haven't already and hit that thumbs up button. Anyways, that's it. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.